Okay, everybody, we're ready. The time has come. Thank you, first of all, so much for being here. It's a nice, cool room, and I hope it'll stay cool for a little while. I've called this Being Assertive because the last time I talked about what's the difference about solution focus, I presented as this grumpy old woman. Some of you may have met her last night. But I thought, well, you know, I'm not getting very far with that. Perhaps I should just be a bit more kind, assertive, nice, and clear in what I'm trying to say about what is special about solution focus. I pressed the wrong button. Oh, yeah, okay. So, I made this point before. Doing solution focus is very different from talking about it. And I'm really grateful for having this kind of conference where we can talk about what we do. It's a different grammar, it's a different language than just talking with a client. And I think, as Kati was saying earlier, we really need to do more talking, I think, for several reasons. We need to talk about it when we're training. We need to talk about it when we're reflecting. What did I do? How did I do it? How did it go? We need to do it for research. What is it that we're researching into? And this is a particularly tricky one, actually, because researchers, of course, want things to stay still. When I'm looking through the microscope, I want you to stay still. So it's difficult for research. Talking with other professionals, we're really not very good at doing this. Making ourselves seem professional, seem coherent, seem as if we know what we're doing, because we don't talk in an engaging, comprehensible way, often, about what we're doing. And my last possibility about why is it important to talk about it is to protect the brand. I put a question marks about that. But is there a brand? I think it's important that if you go and say to somebody, I'm a solution-focused practitioner, there's some understanding about what that might mean. I think we're going to have an open space later about our name. Solution focus isn't a very useful one, but I think we're stuck with it. I think it's the name we've got. But this brand of solution focus, we need to talk about it and have some common understanding, I think, about what we do. So if I get the right button this time. So I'm going to talk briefly about three things. What is it? And this is what I did a SOLTalk about 5 years ago, the grumpy old woman, sorry, she did it 5 years ago, about what is solution focus. Then there's the question, does it work? And then there's an even more tentative question, how does it work? And it's a question that doesn't excite everybody, but I think it's a question that's quite important for things like talking with fellow professionals. The CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy people, have got a very coherent description, explanation of why what they do works. Don't believe it, but it gives them an entry into professional conversations, to conversations with funders and so on. So how does it work? We'll come on to. But first of all, what is it then? And this is a brief summary of my previous SOLTalk, which is there somewhere on YouTube. First of all, we are an expert, and I think we should be proud and assertive about our expertise. It's not that we don't know anything. We don't know anything about the client's life, but we do know how to have a useful conversation. And I think we should be proud and assertive about this particular expertise. We're not into problems and their origins and their causes. That's a different kind of expertise. We do sort of have a theory, and theory and practice, of course, inform each other very much. And I'm particularly interested really now in the right-hand side of this, what's not SF. It's easier to see something that isn't SF than to see something that is. But these things, like when people give you theories of change or causality, this happened because the marketing department did something wrong, or diagnosis, it's always like this. These things are not solution focus. It is solution focus to have a thought about what are we going to pay attention to in this conversation? What are we going to follow up on? What are we listening for? We can realize that things will happen in the course of the conversation. You can't plan a conversation. I can't tell you how many conversations I have planned. I'll knock on the door and I'll say this, and then she'll say that, and I'll say this. She never says what I planned that she would have said. So you have to follow the conversation, it will emerge. And of course, every case is different. We don't have theories or diagnoses or understandings. And things are contextual. The way I behave or the way I am at work may be different from the way I am in the playground or somewhere else. And we are particularly interested in small differences, small things. That's why scaling is so good. It's not all or nothing. What's the difference between 4 and 5? There's a lot. Whereas not SF people love this diagnosis and labeling, which kind of doesn't give you anywhere to go. So that's the difference in theory. We've got a difference in orientation. What are we interested in? Where are we going? We are not interested in what's wrong. Our client may be, and of course you have to give them time for that. But that's not what we're orientated towards, looking for. We're interested in primarily what do you want? What are their best hopes? And how do they describe the realization of those best hopes? We're interested in the general direction and perhaps the first little small actions. I say this particularly for a group that's interested in working with organizations. Organizations expect action plans. And I think if we can allow them to go away with just the tiniest, what are you going to do tomorrow action plan, that's okay. That's all right with us. I think the role of the therapist or the practitioner or the consultant is very different in an SF world. I'm saying that what SF practitioners do is having useful conversations. What Cathy said this morning was generating hope. We're certainly not there to diagnose and absolutely not there to cure whatever's wrong. And in this, I'm going to use this slide twice actually, because I think it's important. SF is often accused of being not interested in emotions. But you leave emotion out of that. Now, emotion like love, hate, anger, that's a noun. Emotions are things that you do. You know, it's a verb, and it happens in a context. And it's not something that you take out of a box and examine. How did you feel then? When you can see how people feel now. What's the point of art, So I think it's not that we're not interested in emotion. Emotion is with us. You see it in the conversation, it moves on in the conversation, and we don't have to inquire about it. I think this is quite important, which means you're going to see the slide again. Okay, that's a brief summary of, I think, what the difference is between what we do and other people do. Okay, so this stuff that we do, does it work? Yes. There's articles, there's reviews, there's books, there's conferences, there's case histories, there's all sorts of things. Yes, it works. And I'm not going to read that to you, but this is a nice sort of academic proof that it works because there's loads of studies and they've been quantified. And Alistair MacDonald has got a really good website, which I think EBTA has taken over, but I'm not sure how well they're keeping it up to date, which gives you all of this kind of stuff. So, yes, it works. And also, I think it's quite beautiful, SF. It's efficient, it works. It's effective, it works quickly. And it's affective. And this is why I said, I've gone the wrong way. This is why I say we work with emotion. It's that, anybody who's had a solution-focused conversation, we had some this morning, you can feel the emotion. It affects people. So, it works. And yet, I'm going to read this. Elliot Connie, some students asked Elliot to come to their university to talk about what he does. And he got this reply. There's very little evidence that solution-focused therapy is effective or that it's beneficial in helping people solve their problems. We haven't got the kind of research support that would put it into the category of evidence-based treatment. For that reason, I cannot extend an invitation to Elliot Connie to come to this university. How many things are wrong with that? This is a university actually saying there's no research, so we don't... Who's supposed to do the research? I mean, what's a university for? Just telling you about other people's research? Anyway, there is research. So why? And yet. So what are they saying? Well, okay, there is some evidence, but I don't like it very much. It's not the same as my evidence. Forget it. Or this is quite, I have some sympathy with this one. If I took you seriously about how brief and effective this is, I'd have to abandon what I spent 5 years learning, or, that's hard to do. And so I kind of understand that. But then there's this, well, I don't understand how could it work? I don't understand it. Explain it to me. I don't get it. And maybe this last one, I don't understand. How can asking somebody for their best hopes and getting a detailed description of those best hopes make the kind of difference that you're claiming for it? I don't get it. How could that work? So, how does it work? I think some people think that this is an interesting question and important question, but not everybody in this community does. And I acknowledge that to do solution focus, you don't have to know how it works. You just have to trust that it will. So don't worry about it too much, unless you're the kind of person who wants to give our brand some kind of standing in the wider world. And it may or may not be important. How does it work? I think this is an important quote from Thomas Fuchs about the position, I suppose, of the individual in the world. And he says, the illness or the problem or the whatever word we use in our language is not in the patient, but the patient is in the illness, as it were, because it's not a state in the head, it's a state of being in the world. And the way we're in the world is not comfortable for us. And this is why we have problems or mental illness. So it's not an individual thing. I think you've all got a word for thing in every language there is. It's not an individual thing, but it's a way of being in the world which isn't comfortable. So I think what we are doing is making people more comfortable in the world that they are in the family that they're in the team that they're in wherever they are. And what we do is have useful conversations about how do you engage in this world with the people, with the environment that you find yourself in. And I think that this is the sort of essence No, Peter doesn't like that word. I'm not allowed to say the essence of SF. I think it's a very important element of SF. It's about changing people's perceptions of the way they are in the world. Now, we can get very, very complicated about this, which the universities will love. But it's a way of joining the dots in your story a little bit differently. This happened and then that happened. Just change the dots a little bit differently. And now this is something that Mark McKergo is now thinking about and will be writing about, stretching the world. So the world has more possibilities in it. More, that's the fancy word, more affordances, but more ways of being in the world. Stretching is a nice word, and it came actually, I think it came, when we were at a conference and Mark was talking about some of this stuff, and one of the participants said, so we're not shrinks anymore, we're stretchers. And isn't it great when a participant gives you something like that? So stretching the world. It's not easy to stretch, even if you've done yoga for 15 years, it's not easy to stretch. And of course, having stretched, you may relax a bit, it's not forever. You may or may not notice the impact of this strangely different world that's emerged during the conversation that you've had with a practitioner. You may notice it immediately, you may notice it later. And this is why we have a whole battery of questions like, what's better, what's different, how did you do that? Lots of, about getting familiar with this stretched, not shrunk world. So he's writing about it. He'll, there it is, he'll talk about it, at some other conference one day. And, not bad. And that's what we're doing. That's what we're doing. Some of the books are upstairs. There we are. There's the website. Thank you. Thank you.